The year was 1981. The world was in flux. Reagan had just taken office. The Cold War was heating up again, and leisure cruises were becoming the latest symbol of middle-class luxury. Daniel and Lorraine Whitaker, both 32, had boarded the MS Ocean Gala on the 5th of March for what was meant to be a 7-day Caribbean cruise. They had married in 1973, lived in Fort Lauderdale, and were described by friends as quiet, reserved, bookish. No children, no enemies, no debts. It was their first vacation in over 3 years. The ship departed from Miami, bound for a classic Nassau, Sanaan, St. Thomas and back. The couple was last seen on night 4 during the captain's gala dinner. They danced, they drank a glass of wine, and then they vanished. At 6:45 a.m. the next morning, a steward named Luis Ramos entered cabin 423 to deliver breakfast. The bed was untouched, the lights were off, the balcony door was open, and the sea wind had blown the curtains across the room like pale ghosts. Their clothes were still in the closet, passports in the drawer, Lorraine's handbag on the chair. Daniel's wallet, minus any cash, sat atop the dresser. The ship's crew was alerted within 30 minutes. An onboard search began immediately. Cabins, decks, engine rooms, kitchens, storage, nothing. The MS Ocean Gala was held at sea for underway. Additional 6 hours while coastal authorities in the U.S. Virgin Islands were contacted. No one saw the couple leave the ship. No one remembered them after dinner. The cruise's CCTV system, primitive by today's standards, had few usable angles. One hallway camera recorded Daniel and Lane walking hand in hand at 11:08 p.m., headed toward the sun deck. That was the last known image of them alive. The cruise company, Atlantic Pearl Lines, cooperated with local authorities at first, but within days lawyers stepped in. Their position was simple. We believe this was a tragic accident. The sea claimed them. There is no indication of foul play. Insurance claims were processed. The ship continued sailing, and the incident slowly faded from the news cycle. Lorraine's sister, Emily Dawson, disagreed. She told a local reporter, "Lorraine didn't just fall. She was afraid before they left. She told me something was wrong." When asked what she meant, Emily hesitated. She didn't explain, just said Daniel had gotten into something and that the cruise wasn't just a vacation. That quote never made it into print. The reporter who wrote it, Cal Fisher, died in a car crash 2 months later. In late 1981, 6 months after the disappearance, the MS Ocean Gala quietly updated its internal cargo records. Not many knew this. Passenger ships often carried small amounts of secured cargo, usually luxury goods, diplomatic pouches, or sensitive documents under private contract. One such container on the March voyage was listed only as private transfer, diplomatic seal, code 739 ampere, no origin, no canini, just a sealed metal container the size of a single coffin. It had been loaded in Nassau and was meant to be offloaded in St. Thomas, but it never arrived. That container was logged as missing in transit and written off in the insurance records, buried under bureaucratic language and international silence. A former crew member interviewed in 1993 under anonymity said, "We were told to pretend it was never on board, that if anyone asked, it was a clerical mistake. But 2 security officers stood by it the whole first day. And that night, the same night Daniel and Lorraine vanished, the container disappeared too." In 1996, 15 years after the cruise, a researcher named Helen Moore was compiling a book on unsolved maritime cases. She came across an internal shipping ledger from Atlantic Pearl Lines, a document misfiled in a Florida shipping registry. It listed several container IDs that had traveled aboard the Ocean Gala in 1981. Among them, 739 ampere marked in red as removed mid-route due to incident. This contradicted every official statement. Helen dug deeper, and in one obscure appendix, she found something strange. A customs official in San Juan had logged the arrival and immediate re-export of a sealed diplomatic container on the 9th of March, 1981, the same day the Ocean Gala docked in St. Thomas, where the container was not supposed to be. The signatory on the form, Daniel Whitaker, except he was already missing and legally presumed dead. In October of 2000, during a routine naval mapping exercise off the coast of the U.S. Virgin Islands, a U.S. Navy sonar operator picked up a metallic echo resting 260 meters below the surface. Initial analysis suggested it was a container or vessel sealed, unmarked, partially embedded in the ocean floor. After recovering it with an unmanned submersible, divers confirmed it matched the dimensions of a diplomatic-grade container. Its serial number had been scratched off, and it bore faint traces of biological material along the outer rivets. Inside they found degraded documents, waterlogged electronics and fragments of 2 wedding rings, corroded but still legible. One was engraved Daniel and Lorraine, the 14th of October 1973. The second come back to me. The container was transported under high security to a naval intelligence facility in Key West, Florida. Officially, it was classified as unidentified submerged object, non-hostile, but those present at the opening described the contents as organized, intentional, and incomplete by design. Among the items recovered, a disassembled radio transmitter similar to military-grade encryption devices used during the early 1982nd half-burned documents, including one bearing the seal of the U.S. State Department, dated February 1981, destination Nassau. A waterproof envelope inside of which were 2 handwritten letters, both unsigned, both in different handwriting, and sealed in a small padded tube, a microfilm reel labeled 739 ampere AE protocol. No one explained what AE meant. Within 48 hours, the entire contents were removed from Key West and flown by military courier to Langley, Virginia. The only thing left behind was a photo, one that had slipped behind the lining of the container, Lorraine Whitaker, standing on the deck of the Ocean Gala, smiling date scribbled on the back, the 7th of March, 1981, and beneath it, in fading blue ink, he thinks they're watching us. I believe him now. In 2004, Lorraine's sister, Emily Dawson, passed away from lung cancer. While clearing out her home in Tampa, her niece discovered a locked metal briefcase buried under quilts in the attic. Inside was a journal, dates, names, maps, and copies of letters Lorraine had sent in the weeks leading up to the cruise. Letters that were never mailed. One dated the 18th of February, 1981 read, "Danny's gotten himself involved with someone. He says it's harmless, but there are meetings. They talk in codes. He carries a small black notebook now and won't let me see it. He says it's bigger than us and that this trip is not what I think it is." Another, more frantic. He said if anything happens, I should run, that some people on the ship are not passengers, that a handoff is going to happen in Nassau. But who brings classified documents onto a honeymoon cruise? Emily had kept these letters hidden for 23 years. She never showed them to police, never spoke to journalists. She simply wrote at the bottom of the journal, "If you're reading this, then someone finally cared enough to look again." In 2006, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a group of Cold War researchers uncovered a reference to something long thought to be myth. Operation Blue Harvest, a multinational program launched in 1980 involving limited cooperation between U.S. intelligence, NATO operatives, and private civilian contractors. Its goal, discrete document and tech transfers across non-military routes to avoid interception by Soviet satellites and surveillance. One of those methods, private cruises. The operation used low-profile civilians as unwitting couriers, passengers who would carry sealed diplomatic material across ports under the guise of vacation travel. They were chosen based on background, appearance, and discretion. The name Daniel Whitaker appeared twice in a redacted memo. In one instance, next to the phrase "asset accepted terms," civilian transport scheduled, March 1981. In the second, more chilling package en route, asset no, longer under full control, extraction not recommended. There was no mention of Lorraine. Lorraine Whitaker was not supposed to be on the cruise. According to the cruise line's reservation records, the initial booking was for one person, Daniel. Lorraine's name was added 8 days before departure. No explanation, no adjustments, no approval from handlers. A note in a separate ledger read, "Wife inserted herself. Contingency plans compromised. Monitor closely. This small decision, her refusal to be left behind, changed everything. A former intelligence officer who spoke anonymously for a now declassified oral history project said civilians were tools, and sometimes tools break. He probably told her, or she figured it out, and that meant the whole operation was exposed. Another agent, retired CIA, offered a different theory. He tried to get out. That's why they both disappeared. There are no leaks from the ocean floor. In 2011, a technician restoring damaged magnetic tapes from a naval listening post in the Caribbean discovered an anomaly. A transmission dated the 9th of March, 1981 at 3:42 a.m., just hours after the Ocean Gala had left its second port. The signal was faint, distorted. It was never processed at the time. The recovered recording lasted 17 seconds. Only one voice, female, panicked, desperate. They know. We have to. It's not just us. Daniel, don't. Interference. They're coming. Then silence. The technician flagged the audio. The file was seized and destroyed, but not before a backup was made and uploaded quietly to a dark archive known only to a handful of maritime investigators. One of them captioned it simply, "Her voice at last." By 2020, both Daniel and Lorraine Whitaker had been legally declared deceased for nearly 4 decades. No bodies, no death certificates, only the ocean and what it returned. A memorial plaque sits on a stone bench near Fort Lauderdale Beach, placed by Lorraine's niece. They were never ghosts. The world simply chose not to see them. To this day, the cruise company denies all wrongdoing. Atlantic Pearl Lines was quietly absorbed by a European holding group in 2005. The Ocean Gala was sold for scrap in India in 2009. No surviving crew members have ever testified on record. The recovered container, its contents remain classified. The microfilm reel labeled AET Protocol was never publicly acknowledged, but a final entry recently unsealed in a congressional oversight file from 1982 may offer the only answer we'll ever get. It reads, 2 civilian couriers compromised, package retrieved, exposure contained, status, mission complete. In the end, Daniel and Lorraine weren't just passengers. They weren't just another cold case. They were pawns in a game that had no rules, played on a board that floats between nations, beneath banners of secrecy and flags no one ever salutes in daylight. They didn't fall overboard. They were pulled under by silence, by protocol, by history, and the ocean. It just held them until it couldn't anymore. The recovery of the container in 2000 had been logged as a routine deep-sea retrieval. But the diver who first made visual contact, Chief Petty Officer Marco Ellison, later gave an off-the-record interview to a military archivist. He said it didn't look like it had sunk. It looked positioned upright, flat on the sand, like someone didn't want it to break open. He described faint markings along the container's edge, not serial numbers, but scratched in letters. LWDW, no exit. When the story was published years later in a retired naval journal, Ellison was found dead in his garage, ruled a suicide, but his daughter insisted. My dad never once talked about taking his own life. He said, something came back up with us. Then he stopped sleeping. His notebook from that mission, still in the family's possession, ends with 3 underlined words. They were buried alive. In 2009, a low-level analyst at the NSA, Rebecca Aris, began cross-referencing Cold War maritime incidents. She stumbled upon the audio fragment recovered from the naval transmission in 2011, the woman's voice. She processed it through updated AI audio cleaning software. A name was heard, faint but unmistakable, Lorraine, then Daniel. They know what you cut. Within 72 hours, Alice was suspended, her access revoked. She never returned to work. Her father, a former radar technician, told a podcast in 2016. She called me crying, said she found a ghost in a black box, said it proved they didn't die by accident. Months later, Rebecca disappeared. Her car was found near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, empty. In 2017, an investigative journalist named Miles Hanley, who had spent over a decade covering Cold War intelligence operations, received an anonymous envelope Inside, a photocopy of a safety deposit key, a Miami bank location, a single sentence: "They didn't die at sea. They were transferred." The box had been rented in 1982 under a false name. Inside, Hanley found a cassette tape labeled St. Thomas Dock 3981 and a typed memo: "Intercepted deck audio, night of extraction, level 5 only." He played the tape. "Wind distant waves, then let her go. She doesn't know anything." A male voice. Calm, American accent. A pause. A reply colder. "She wasn't supposed to be here." Neither was he after what he said. A scuffle. A single scream. Then silence. Then water. The sound of something heavy being dragged. Hanley published a blog post previewing his findings. He died a week later. Heart failure. Age 42. The tape never found again. In 2020, a declassified archive from the British Foreign Office revealed an overlooked entry, a cable sent from the US Embassy in Nassau to London, dated the 11th of March, 1981, 2 days after Daniel and Lorraine vanished. The subject line: "Complication at sea, civilian asset neutralized." The body of the message had been mostly redacted, but one phrase was left untouched: "Extraction aborted. Observer removed. Awaiting diplomatic clearance for cleanup authorization." When British archivists requested the full version, the US State Department replied that the document had been destroyed in a 1994 fire, but a whistleblower within the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, later leaked a memo referring to that exact incident. It stated, "US used Atlantic civilian vessel to relay encoded documentation related to AET protocol testing. Passenger Whitaker confirmed as courier companion unintended variable protocol required full silence." The memo was marked "Top Secret Joint Eyes Only at T-Phase Dissect." No country has ever publicly acknowledged such an operation existed. In 2022, Lorraine's niece Anna Dawson received a package. No return address, no tracking. Inside, a photo album, water-stained and partially burned, a gold bracelet with Lorraine's initials, and a passport issued in 1978-inch Daniel's name, but with no exit stamps after 1981. Tucked into the back of the album was a final item, a photo, faded and grainy. 2 people, older, sitting under a palm tree near a beach, the man's arm around the woman's shoulder, both smiling. Behind them, a boat barely visible, its name scrolled in white on the hull. "Exit protocol." There was a handwritten note in the envelope. They were taken, not lost, buried in silence, but for a few years they were still together. No further explanation. Anna turned the photo over. On the back, it simply read Martinique, 1986. Following the anonymous photo delivery in 2022, journalist Clara Renner, working for the Atlantic Dispatch, began compiling a retrospective on the case. She filed formal inquiries to the CIA, NSA, FBI, and the Department of Defense under FOIA. Most requests returned the same phrase: "Records unavailable under National Security Exemption 3B." But one reply from a retired legal advisor for the State Department revealed a single overlooked clause. Under Operation AET parameters, all civilian assets involved are considered conditional participants. In the event of operational breach or exposure, the United States maintains full authority to disavow, redirect, or silence said assets domestically or abroad. In short, if Daniel and Lorraine had become liabilities, it was legal to make them vanish. No trial, no notice, no trace. Rena's article was never published. Her editorial team received a quiet but firm call from a federal liaison. One line was remembered by a junior fact-checker: "This story was buried with the ocean. Leave it there." That same year, a private marine research company scanning the seafloor for oil deposits near the Virgin Islands stumbled upon a second container. Similar dimensions, same metallic composition, unmarked, heavily corroded. When brought to the surface, it was completely empty. No documents, no electronics. Only one object remained, bolted to the inner wall with rusted brackets, a typewriter key, the letter L, and beneath it etched with a hand tool. She told the truth. The find was reported to local authorities and then seized by the US Navy. All photos of the object were erased from the cloud except one, preserved by a technician who never shared his name. The image made its way through encrypted circles. Its file name Lorraine knew first, Joel JPG. In 2023, exactly 42 years after Daniel and Lorraine boarded the MS Ocean Gala, a final anomaly emerged. The cruise ship's original passenger logbook, believed lost in a 1990 warehouse fire, was found in the private collection of a maritime archist in Belgium. Every page was scanned, photographed, and digitized. But page 423, the exact cabin assigned to the Whitkers, was different. Handwritten in faded ink, added weeks after the cruise ended. They were not lost, they were removed. She asked the wrong question. He gave the right answer. Now they sleep. There was no signature, but on the bottom right corner of the page, barely visible beneath the ink, a watermark appeared under infrared. AET Phase 3 resolved.